Reylo is objectively good, but it could be better. Before we begin, I just wanted to start this video by saying that the following take is just my opinion, and that this video is sponsored by Campfire Blaze. Whether you're a writer crafting your latest masterpiece or a dungeon master carefully forging your next epic adventure, find out more at the end of this video. For now, let's get started. The Disney Star Wars sequel trilogy became one of the most iconic cinematic works in modern history, and with it came the undeniably powerful romance between legendary bad boy Kylo Ren and Rey, also known as Rey Skywalker to people who don't hate women. A romance that true, very stable fans have affectionately named Reylo. And this tortured union between Rey and Kylo Ren was soon recognized as the most complex and ultimately the most emotionally charged tales ever written that was totes adorbs and was totally themes. Themes are masterpiece. In fact, I don't think I stand alone in recognizing Rian Johnson's subtle underlying genius when writing what can only be described as this century's Romeo and Juliet. However, as the story goes on, it becomes clear that the final romance unfortunately failed to exploit the full beauty of their tragic epic. But if the timeless tragic love of Kylo and Rey was already so great, what else could they have done differently? How could it possibly have been any better than it was? Well, let's take a look at the grand tale as it was already so elegantly delivered. Two households both alike in dignity in the New Republic, where we lay our scene. From ancient grudge break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. From forth the fatal loins of these two foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life. Hark! The dark hero enters the waiting stage. Kylo Ren, the fallen son, lost heir to the noble house of Skywalker. Against him, the exiled heroine stands opposed. Rey, the lonely princess of Jakku, daughter to the evil house of Palpatine, whose master did once terrorize the galaxy, who, as emperor, began the age-old feud for all to see between the shining house of Skywalker and the vile house Palpatine, where once a galaxy so far away endured this blight. Kylo and Rey shall at last conclude this fight. One thing that has been true since the creation of Star Wars has been its solid foundation in the mists of mysticism, the mysterious force, and the dark and light side of the force. The dark representing raw emotion, unrestrained passion, and one's greedy indulgence to the darkest parts of ourselves, a complete surrender to the primal, while the light side represents the tougher road towards discipline, enlightenment, and the higher pleasures. In the words of Grecian philosopher and playwright Aristotle,
the light and dark represent the two dimensions of the human soul. The temptation of falling back into the primal versus the difficult climb to higher consciousness. And that is why my work is actually good, and why pointing out plot holes is hatred supremacy.
And this is the beautiful dynamic that Kylo and Rey represent. Kylo, the boy who rejected his mentor's guidance on the road to a higher self, instead clinging to the primal dark of the wilderness, a slave to his carnal desire and animalistic passion. In this capacity, he acts as the perfect shadow and therefore serves as the perfect counterpart to Rey. Lucasfilm, in its massive stroke of genius, gives us a Star Wars version of a classic romance scenario, that of the ingenue and the rake. The ingenue being a young, innocent, unsophisticated woman, a position that, despite her relatively tough life, Rey fits perfectly. Only 19 years old, she spends her evenings daydreaming about adventure and is fixed with a childlike infatuation with heroes like Han Solo and Luke Skywalker. Plus, her life as a lonely scavenger may have left her tough but quite lacking in proper etiquette or how to handle social situations. The rake is essentially the opposite, a man mocked by immoral conduct and, more importantly, is often a prodigal son, wasting his inheritance on loose drink and heavy women, a role that Kylo Ren also fills surprisingly well. After all, when Kylo Ren is introduced to us, he's slaughtering resistance members and interrogating old men before eventually moving on to presiding over the annihilation of several planets. The inheritance he so carelessly squanders is less of a monetary nature and focuses more on the legacy of his bloodline. Kylo was left with the distinct privilege of being handed wisdom and skill from his uncle Luke Skywalker, the greatest hero in the galaxy. But rather than consorting with harlots and hobbs, he spent those gifts on his own selfish desires by pledging his allegiance to the dark side. Rey, I know everything I need to know about you. Kylo Ren,
you do. You do. You have that look in your eyes. From the forest, you called me a monster.
Rey, you are a monster. Kylo Ren,
yes, I am.
And this classic tale of rake and ingenue is ultimately a dance of redemption, where the doe-eyed ingenue catches the attention of the cynical rake, who, having been dulled to life's primal pleasures, sees something uniquely special within this new woman. The story arc focuses less on one's development into a hero and more upon the rake's development from a grown boy obsessed with a boyish pursuit of simple pleasure into a man ready to embrace responsibility, the potential for a brighter future, and the complex pleasures of adulthood and love. This is exactly where we see Kylo Ren at the beginning of his journey. To quote Snoke, "Alas, you're no Vader. You're just a child in a mask." Many might argue that the love story of Disney Star Wars follows another classic formula, that of the love triangle, an emotional struggle between two hopefuls with one common love interest, just as one might see in The Phantom of the Opera between the Phantom, Raoul, and Christine Daae, or The Hunger Games between Gale, Peter, and Katniss Everdeen. It's normally a tragic and emotionally tense story, normally upholding the seemingly inevitable result of two characters riding off happily ever after, while one is left with his heart shattered to pieces. The assertion is that the love triangle in Disney Star Wars is among Finn, Kylo, and Rey, which is of course ridiculous. Finn pales in comparison to Kylo Ren because, as we all know, Finn hasn't committed nearly enough genocide to be attractive. As Gary Stottle states in his legendary magnum opus, The Euphoria, a study on narrative structure and character development,
Write a psychopath. Wenches love psychopaths. Hashtag the Force is female.
In The Force Awakens, we're introduced to Rey, a character yearning for connection, and so the lonely Princess Palpatine dutifully waits for her family to return, for her knight in shining armor to carry her away from that dismal existence like a prince from a fairy tale. But no prince ever arrives. Meanwhile, we're introduced to a Kylo Ren who, much like the promiscuous rakes of old, has embraced selfish primal passion, a boy fully dedicated to his own journey down to the dark side. But parallel to Rey's hunger for some kind of emotional connection to save her from her loneliness, Kylo Ren craves salvation. But within Kylo we see conflict that in the end will signal the oncoming romance and spark his eventual infatuation with Rey. Just as the Rey consciously shies from adulthood, desperate for carnal pleasure, while secretly hungering for something more meaningful, which usually arrives in the form of the ingenue, Kylo feverishly walks the path of darkness, yet at the same time secretly hungers for enlightenment to fight back against his primal desire to remain a boy and become a man. Although he aches for stability, maturity, and enlightenment, Kylo Ren actively fears the burden. Kylo Ren.
Forgive me, I feel it again. The pull to the light. Supreme Leader senses it. Show me again the power of the darkness.
The story of The Force Awakens is the story of Kylo Ren meeting Rey and Rey meeting Kylo Ren, and then Kylo alone recognizing what that meant. That at long last he had found not Han, not Leia, not any of his friends at the Jedi Temple, not Luke, and not even Darth Vader, but possibly the one person in the galaxy who could truly understand both his torment and, more importantly, him. And we see this escalate by the time we reach The Last Jedi. As is tradition with the ravenous rake, he soon becomes infatuated with the delicate ingenue, a tradition Kylo Ren follows perfectly by the advent of The Last Jedi. Kylo Ren.
They were filthy junk traders. Sold you off for drinking money. They're dead in a pauper's grave in the Jakku Desert. You come from nothing. You're nothing, but not to me.
The story of The Last Jedi, the most themed film of the Disney Star Wars sequels, carries two major elements in their delightful romance: seduction and rejection. The first half of The Last Jedi deals with Rey in an emotionally vulnerable state. She had lost her teacher in Han Solo, and Luke Skywalker had rejected her request for mentorship, and she has yet to truly discover where her connection lies, and so her own hunger remains unsatisfied. Meanwhile, Kylo's trek down the dark path had made things easy. The power it granted allowed him to accomplish nearly any goal with ease. It wasn't until Rey emerged that Kylo encountered a real challenge which sparked his interest in her in the first place. Another aspect of baseless critique. Insert something about Nazis. You can see this interest manifest in the offer he gives her during the climactic battle in The Force Awakens. To quote Kylo Ren,
"You need a teacher. I can show you the ways of the Force."
The Last Jedi shows us that despite previous failures, Kylo was angered, but like a rake spurned by the ingenue, his interest is piqued, but his confidence is not yet broken. Just as the rake would pursue his new potential conquest, Kylo still believes he can seduce Rey to the dark side when he once again tells her to join him. In the words of Kylo Ren,
"Let the past die. Kill it if you have to. It's the only way you can become what you are meant to be."
Kylo Ren using his worldly wisdom to tempt Rey with the one thing she desires: a family.
Your parents threw you away like garbage, but you can't stop needing them. It's your greatest weakness, looking for them everywhere. In Han Solo, now we're Luke Skywalker.
As Kylo Ren discovered during The Force Awakens, both he and Rey possess something the other needs. Each can fill the empty void in the other's heart. And so this seduction segment of The Last Jedi is when Rey comes to the same realization. Kylo's seduction of Rey reaches its peak when she confronts Luke Skywalker about his betrayal. At that moment, with the loss of her parents and Luke, Rey has lost all avenues of hope, and Kylo Ren's seduction is complete. The rake has seduced the ingenue with his practiced masculine wiles. But remember, seduction isn't the main goal. Unity is. and this is why the throne room scene is widely recognized as the most romantic scene in all of Star Wars. It's here that Kylo Ren's confidence is at its peak. Rey is fighting alongside him. He had seduced the ingenue, killed his master, defeated his guards, and stood ready to claim the mantle of Supreme Leader. Then the story takes a turn. Kylo offers Rey his hand, and with all the arrogance of a spoiled rake, he offers her everything he believes that she wants, only to be rejected and soundly defeated. Rey knew that her thirst for connection was not with a hero, but with the friends she had made along the way. And so, with his confidence shattered, Kylo undergoes a crisis of character. And it's at this point that Kylo Ren's character becomes malleable, ready to change. And this malleability, much like heated metal, manifests as burning rage. And this leads to first, Kylo Ren's ongoing rampage during the Rise of Skywalker, and second, his self-reflection during the confrontation with the memory of his father. Han, I miss you, son. Kylo, your son is dead. Han, no, Kylo Ren is dead. My son is alive. Kylo, I know what I have to do, but I don't know if I have the strength to do it. Han, you do. And third, his final redemption, which first manifests as their team effort to battle Palpatine, a perfect mirror to the fight in Snoke's throne room. And finally, he sacrifices his life to save Rey, ending in a passionate kiss of gratitude. It's ultimately the role of the ingenue to redeem the rake by becoming, in his eyes, a prize he desires, but is much harder to attain than any previous objects of desire he'd encountered before. Because for the first time, it isn't only the woman's beauty, but her heart that he ultimately craves. Likewise, the ingenue may find the rake alluring, but craves a better man, and so the rake is forced to wake from a state of constant levity and change for the better, while the willing ingenue works to change him. The brilliant emotional journey of Kylo and Rey, though heavily criticized by man babies, is once again elegantly encapsulated in Aristotle's The Euphoria.
Humanity in its entirety is not logical. The nature of humanity is an impulsive one. They make choices based on emotion. No one man thinks exactly the same as another. To act logically would mean casting aside one's humanity.
Proving once and for all that logic is only for immature man-children. But this all sounds great, so again, how could this tragic tale possibly be any better than already presented? Well, let's find out, shall we? Just remember, the following scenario is simply my perspective brought by my passions for this legendary couple, and is in no way meant to debunk your happiness. As written by the great Aristotle,
there is no greater waste of time than debating art.
We are, after all, entitled to our feelings and the space to express them. Having said that, what is romance if not two people missing something, seeking something, and finding it in someone else? The story of Kylo Ren and Rey closely resembles the romantic epic of Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare. Two star-crossed lovers, literally in this case, whose union is forbidden because they were born to rival families. And this is true twice. Kylo belonging to the House of Skywalker and Rey belonging to the rival House of Palpatine. But it's also true in a spiritual sense, with Kylo pledging his allegiance to the dark side and Rey choosing the light. But perhaps Romeo and Juliet wasn't the best formula to utilize. After all, given the complex genius of The Last Jedi, one can't seriously expect your average viewer to fully comprehend its deep philosophical messages unless of course they have a firm background in theoretical Russian poetry. Rey is undoubtedly the central character of Disney Star Wars. However, as one may have noticed with our exploration into the drama between Kylo and Rey, it is Kylo who stands as the central character to their romance. He is, after all, the one whose character arc is set to shift and change around his relationship with Rey, while Rey as a character is linked to a general search for companionship, which is why she's eventually able to reject Kylo Ren during The Last Jedi. So, when talking about the tragic story of Reylo, we're really talking about the arc of Kylo Ren from boy destined by blood to be a hero to prodigal son corrupting his gifts for selfish desire, and then to his redemption. Keeping all this in mind, let's take a look at what presentation may have served to paint the journey of Reylo in a far more profound and emotionally resonant display. And so sorry to disappoint the fanboys, but this fix does not include making Rey more attractive. Rey's empowering nature comes from representing what real women look like, and as anyone who respects women knows, real women aren't attractive. Just remember that the following is simply my opinion. So, if you find yourself feeling upset, just remember that Star Wars is a silly movie series about space wizards intended for children. Anyway, as Anakin Skywalker's flesh was melting off on Mustafar after having most of his limbs violently amputated by his best friend and losing a war revolving around corrupt governments, trade negotiations, and taxes, we see the final moments of Anakin's reign as galactic hero. His nobility corrupted by horrific tragedy, a tragedy that ushered him across the moral horizon from savior to destructor. And it's this same critical, vulnerable moment where we first see Kylo Ren. Despite the years he's traveled down the dark path, he's still relatively fresh from tragedy and betrayal. Not only from the mentor who lost faith in him, but the mother who lied to him about his familial bond to Darth Vader, and the father who abandoned him. If you remember this quote from earlier, Kylo Ren,
I feel it again. the pull to the light.
Signaling to us, as written, he is in a morally and emotionally vulnerable time in his character arc, confident in his abilities and chosen path as mentioned before, but locked in a constant battle against his moral self, the self that Rey helps him to become. So rather than Romeo and Juliet, a better foundation for the tale of Kylo and Rey would be the tale of Beauty and the Beast, at least in premise. That premise being of a selfish man enslaved to his own desires, cursed to live out the rest of his days as a hideous beast until he finds his one true love, which he comes to find in the character Beauty. So, how would this translate into Star Wars? Well, the heart of this dynamic is perfectly set after Kylo Ren had captured Rey, and we come to this exchange. Rey, I know everything I need to know about you. Kylo Ren,
You do? Ah, you do. You had the look in your eyes from the forest. You called me a monster.
Rey, you are a monster. Kylo Ren,
Yes, I am.
remember, each character of the fairy tale had two elements that were essential to their roles. The Beast was marked by his selfishness and his infatuation with Beauty. Beauty herself was marked by compassion and choosing to suffer on behalf of another. And for the sake of argument, we'll let this play out as if Kylo and Rey also possessed these elements. So how would this look if the focus of Disney Star Wars was centered a little more on romance with what is, in my opinion, an optimal writing formula for Kylo and Rey? We'll start with part 1, The Force Awakens. One of the biggest problems of The Force Awakens is that it wastes too much time trying to appeal to big dum dum fanboys. So, let's keep the beginning and the end, but alter some of the middle to fit the new model and better signal the romance from movie 1. In the original story, Beauty surrenders herself to the Beast on behalf of her father, who had accidentally committed a crime in the Beast's eyes. Rather than kill Beauty, the Beast becomes entranced by her charm. In our version of The Force Awakens, Finn's escape from the First Order plays a much larger role. Finn is still a stormtrooper that experiences a moral crisis, and the goal of the First Order is still to eliminate the last of the Jedi, as explained in the title crawl. To quote, "The sinister First Order has risen from the ashes of the Empire and will not rest until Skywalker, the Last Jedi, has been destroyed." Our changes technically begin when Starkiller Base fired on the Republic. Everything proceeds as before, except we see Kylo Ren voice his protest against firing the weapon, only to be immediately rejected by Hux. Kylo Ren,
You told me the weapon was only for intimidation. It was never supposed to be used.
General Hux, we're operating under the direct order of Supreme Leader Snoke. Are you suggesting we defy his command? Kylo Ren,
No, proceed as ordered, General.
this display of virtue allows a small hint for his future redemption, but the real change begins soon after the First Order attacks Maz Kanata's castle. In the original movie, Rey runs into the surrounding forest and is captured by Kylo Ren, Kylo already having developed an interest in Rey. However, in this version, Kylo Ren captures Finn and promises to absolve the renegade First Order stormtrooper of any wrongdoing if Rey would voluntarily surrender, and surrender she does. Kylo keeps his promise and Finn is released. Rey is still interrogated by Kylo and he reads her mind, and having done so, he sees a kindred spirit in Rey.
There's such a sad love deep in your eyes. It's a kind of pale jewel, opened and closed. Within your eyes, I'll place the sky within your eyes. And as the pain sweeps through, it makes no sense for you. Every thrill is gone. Wasn't too much fun at all.
In this version, Rey is physically helpless and of course cannot use the Force against Kylo Ren, but living a life alone on a hostile planet has required her to develop a natural intuition when reading people. This is how she senses Kylo's internal conflict and wounded soul. And just like Beauty before her, Rey begins to see past his monstrous exterior and into the better man underneath. Kylo is shaken but is eventually able to discover the location of BB-8 and the map to Luke Skywalker. Having completed his mission, Snoke orders him to dispose of Rey immediately. But before Kylo is able to carry out his order, Starkiller Base comes under resistance attack, and Finn, along with Chewbacca and Han Solo, help to free Rey. The final battle proceeds as before. Kylo Ren immediately chases after Rey and the others. He kills Han Solo and dispatches Finn. However, he tries to connect with Rey while they battle. His skills far outmatch her own, and so the battle becomes less a fight for victory and more a lesson with an unwilling student. Kylo giving her advice on lightsaber form and insight into the Force. Then the moment of truth. By Snoke's command, Rey was supposed to die, but when Chewbacca arrives in the Millennium Falcon to save the day, Kylo Ren, fully possessing the power to destroy Rey, instead lets her go. And that brings us to part 2, The Last Jedi. The Last Jedi proceeds more or less the same. Snoke berates Kylo for his weakness and his failure to kill Rey, knowing full well that she represents Kylo Ren's pull to the light, while he represents his apprentice's pull to the dark. Kylo still finds a Force connection with Rey, and still reveals Luke's deception to turn her against him, pushing Rey to reject Luke Skywalker as Kylo Ren Ren rejected Han Solo. Snoke orders Kylo to kill Rey, and it's here that Kylo must make a choice: Snoke in the dark path or Rey and into the unknown. Kylo chooses Rey and kills Snoke for her sake, rejecting the certain path into the dark side. He then offers Rey to join him.
Join me. We're past the point of no return. No more backwards glances. The games we played until now are at an end. Past all the thought of if or when. No use resisting. Abandon thought and let the dream descend.
This is where Rey rejects him. This is where Kylo Ren sinks into a monstrous rage and takes the mantle of Supreme Leader of the First Order. After the Battle of Crate, after Kylo faces down Luke Skywalker, after Rey saves the Resistance from Kylo's wrath. In Beauty and the Beast allows Beauty to visit her family, telling her that if she chose not to return, he would die of a broken heart. In the original iteration, Beauty fails to return in time for the sake of her family, and Rey has also done just that, having found her new family with the Resistance. Kylo Ren may not physically die in this scenario, but the heart is traditionally seen as the icon of ethics, and so Kylo Ren's broken heart is represented by his willing fall into evil. So no, Kylo does not die, but the good part of him does.
I gave you my music. I watched your song take wing. And now, how you've repaid me, denied me, and betrayed me.
It's important to note that contrary to Rian Johnson's need to rid Kylo Ren of his mask, for our purposes, it's important that the mask is never removed, and that we never see Kylo Ren's face. We'll come back to this point in a moment. And finally, we reach the rise of Skywalker. In this version, Emperor Palpatine does not return, and yes, this means that Rey remains effectively a nobody. Rival houses aren't necessary for the Beauty and the Beast dynamic, and so instead Kylo Ren becomes the main antagonist. And oddly enough, this doesn't actually change the overall threat from the original. The original spent the movie following the heroes as they hunted for the Wayfinder so they could defeat the Emperor's Grand Armada. Having been rejected by Rey, Kylo Ren redoubles his efforts to emulate the legacy of Darth Vader, and he begins by gathering the First Order's navy for a final strike at the Resistance, but does not launch his attack. On the surface, this appears to be mere preparation, but in reality, deep inside his heart, Kylo is trying to tempt Rey to return. On Rey's end, she joins a last-ditch effort to slay Kylo Ren. However, Rey joins the fight believing that she can save Kylo Ren like Luke Skywalker did to Darth Vader. See, it's like poetry. It rhymes. Kylo's hesitation causes a schism between himself and General Hux. In A Mirror to Return of the Jedi, Finn, Rose Tico, and Poe battle the First Order while Rey confronts Kylo Ren. General Hux takes Rey into custody while also being secretly aware of Kylo's connection to Rey. As Rey and Kylo are reunited and they begin to speak, a duel of words rather than lightsabers. This is when Hux initiates a coup by shooting Rey in the back. As she lies on the ground dying, Kylo runs to her side. Hux's men quickly gun down Kylo Ren's bodyguards while the Supreme Leader is distracted. General Hux gloats. His plan had worked perfectly. As Kylo Ren's men die and as he sees the life fade from Rey's eyes, Kylo's rage returns. Hux orders his men to open fire and Kylo is shot over and over, but his rage keeps him running. He slices through Hux's men and eventually Hux himself. In the original Beauty and the Beast, Beauty returns to find a dead or dying beast. She of course revives him, and once he wakes, he turns into a handsome prince. So this is when Kylo holds Rey in his arms, lamenting her death.
No one would listen, no one but her could hear as the outcast hears. Shamed into solitude, shunned by the multitude, I learned to listen. In my dark, my heart heard music, and she saw my loneliness, shared in my emptiness.
For the first time since the trilogy began, he removes his helmet. The beastly mask he wore when walking down the beastly path finally removed and his human face revealed. Kylo Ren has changed back into Ben Solo. Ben kisses Rey and she awakens. She returns with a passionate kiss of gratitude before Ben Solo tells the First Order to stand down and finally dying, having given the last of his life force to revive Rey. And the movie ends with Rey accepting her new identity and her new future. Overall, Disney's trilogy seemed a little unfocused, claiming to redirect their efforts toward engaging a new female audience, while maintaining the adventuring tradition that fostered the franchise's predominantly male audience. As if Lucasfilm tried to balance two main narratives, Rey's adventure story and the romance of Kylo Ren. The unfortunate result is a story fueled by genius but filled with elements that were never played out to the full potential, rather than abandoning the safe time-tested tale of Romeo and Juliet. Ultimately, the biggest failure of Kylo and Rey was Lucasfilm's reluctance to allow the characters to take the lead, choosing instead to run toward toward the safety of nostalgia. Perhaps instead of mirroring iconic events from past episodes, they could have told one focused artistic vision instead of an old story retold without the passion of the artist behind it. Perhaps if Lucasfilm really did choose to cut ties with its past, as its decanonizing of the Star Wars Expanded Universe and the systematic elimination of its legacy characters would suggest, and allowed a new, solid narrative with a new artistic vision to better characterize the characters, then maybe the fans could have gotten something closer to a thematic, timeless romantic epic and memorable characters to lead a newly forged legend that would outlast 1,000 generations. And speaking of my opinions, it's my objective opinion that this video has been brought to you by Campfire Blaze. Have you ever thought about creating your own terrifying monsters, plotting your own romantic epic, or designing your very own magical system from the ground up? Well, fear no more. Over 80,000 writers use Campfire Blaze to write better stories faster. Campfire Blaze is a browser-based writing application with a full suite of organizational tools that help you write stories and world build. Its manuscript module will safely store your project in the cloud and allow you to quickly reference details from your story with auto-tagging, create dynamic characters with Blaze's character module, and explore how they interact with the relationship web. The timelines are extremely flexible, allowing you to plan stories in ways that work for you. Keep track of all your world building with maps, locations, species, magical systems, cultures, and more. Your stories are private, but it's easy to share them or even collaborate with others. And I'm sure my fellow subjectivists will delight in learning that Blaze comes with 13 themes, from crime to western to fantasy to sci-fi, romance, and even horror. Set the scene by creating a custom theme that matches your story's tone. Campfire Blaze receives new features every month and is free to use for smaller projects. If you need more space, you only have to pay for the features you need for as little as 50 cents. If you aren't satisfied, get your money back with their 30-day return policy. Write better stories faster with Campfire Blaze. Click the link in the description below to learn more.